In 2005, I was hiking in the Siskiyou Forest in southern Oregon. My girlfriend was with me and my dog, a 3-year-old male German Shepherd named Frankie. I was 28, she was 29 at the time. I work in real estate when not hiking, so Frankie, although a big dog, has not really had an outdoor life. He loves it when we go hiking, though he can sometimes be a handful. Frankie had went off trail, and something held his attention to the point that I had to also leave the trail and corral him back by use of his leash. Meantime, my girlfriend, Dina, that's short for Denise, went ahead on down the trail. We were maybe an hour from where had parked. Dina began to holler my name, so I pushed the dog to hurry and follow. When I got within view of Dina, we were maybe 40 yards apart. About the same distance, perpendicular to the trail, stood a hairy man about my height, which is 6 foot, and the man was wearing no clothing, except he wasn't possibly what would fall into the category of a man. It's hard to explain. The thing was huge in mass, arms bulging with muscle. It had the face of a man, but it was very hairy. Some would have claimed fur, not hair, and that's how thick it was on him. And it covered his body except around the eyes and on the palms of its hands. The fingernails were not claws, but they appeared to have been sharpened or maybe chewed to points, so that they were extended the already long digits to an extra 1.5 inches in length, giving the impression of a Freddy Krueger to anyone that had seen those movies. The fur or hair on the creature was well groomed and closer to black than brown. He had long hair where hair normally grew on a man, on the scalp. The skin appeared to have a tan or light brown color to it. The only place where there wasn't hair growing was around the eyes and on its palms, giving the conclusion that it also had no hair on the bottom of its feet. Though he had no clothing on, the fur or hair was so thick that you couldn't tell whether it was a male or female, other than we just knew it was a male. Plus, there was no visible breasts under all that fur. What was apparent was that it was extremely muscular, and judging from the way he was squatted and leaning from one side to the other, also very agile. He was staring intently at Dina. She had picked up a rock and thrown it at the creature. He easily moved out of the harm's way, while never taking his eyes off of her. She continued to holler my name, and the creature was also making some sort of noise. It sounded closest to the sound that an owl would make. As we got closer, I expected Frankie to want to take off after the man-like thing, but Frankie was content to bark from our location, which was now about 20 feet from Dina. She remained frozen, looking at the hairy man. He finally took his attention off of her and was now looking straight at the dog. Frankie was barking, but not making any attempt to pull at the leash to get at the hairy man. All of us stayed in this formation for what seemed like about 20 minutes. Frankie was getting more confident and began to pull at the leash, which caused the hairy man to disappear into the forest. The dog and I joined Dina, and we continued our hike, which was bring us back to our car eventually. There was plenty of time left in the day, but after our encounter with the hairy man, we were not in much of a mood to stop and smell the flowers. Even Frankie seemed to be more devoted to getting down the trail than to worrying about what distractions were seen along the way. Despite our pushing along down the trail, it became apparent something was following along behind us. Branches could be heard breaking, and at one point there sounded like a conversation going on, but in a language neither myself nor my girlfriend could claim to know. What was clear to know was that the man or creature was infatuated with Dina. As we made our way down the trail to help pass the time, I told her about how there were stories passed down through the generations of the Native Americans about Bigfoot, the North American ape, sneaking into their camps at night and stealing women out of the teepees. I told her about a documented case of a woman that was kidnapped, and when she was turned loose by the Bigfoot, it was inside a cave which the opening was blocked by a large boulder that was pushed into place. When she looked around the cave, she discovered there were 2 other women in the cave with her, one of which had been there several years and had borne a child to the hairy man. Terrified, of course, the woman managed to wiggle her way out of the cave and escaped back to her people. When she arrived, she was nearly starved and was never quite right in the mind ever since. The feral man, or creature, we encountered could easily have been an offspring of such a union. It was extremely muscular, tall but not a giant, and perhaps the reason the man thinks fur or hair looked so well groomed was because it was a half-breed, half human and half ape-man. About 20 minutes away from our vehicle, we had another sighting of the same creature. He was waiting for us down the trail. Even the dog didn't want to get closer once we saw him, but there was no much choice if we didn't want to turn around and go back the other way. He waited, squatting in the middle of the trail, until we were maybe 10 yards away. By then I had taken point because the dog would not, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do if it came to it, but luckily the man-creature decided to move off the trail before it came to a showdown. However, after passing that point and my letting the dog and Dina go ahead of me, I was hit in the back with a rock about the size of a baseball. It hurt like hell, and I went from being a little frightened and overly cautious to being just flat out pissed off. I wasn't sure what to do about it, but it's probably a good thing that I had time to think, because I'm afraid I would have acted rashly and given the opportunity, and probably would have ended up getting my ass kicked or worse, depending upon the mood of the creature. Dina must have seen what was on my mind, and she reminded me she would like to make it home with the same boyfriend she started out with, and that it was my responsibility to see that it happened that way, and not to seek revenge against a creature with the mind of a 5-year-old. In defense, I reminded her that he had some very adult-themed activities for her inside that 5-year-old's mind. However, she was exactly correct. I was just being defensive. While she kept pushing forward and Dina lectured me, I could hear the creature going around us, getting ahead so that there was likely to be another circumstance where we had to get past him in order to reach the car. I didn't have any weapons, just the dog, who wasn't proving to be much help. That wasn't to say he wouldn't be if things got tight, but I really didn't care to have things get to that point before finding out if I could count on help from Frankie or not. He did at least exhibit some aggression there towards the end of our last encounter. I took off my belt and wrapped it around my hand a couple times, leaving the buckle on the loose end. I didn't think it would be much help, but it was all I had. Now I wished I had picked up that rock that he threw. The forest was thick with underbrush along this part of the trail. We were coming to a turn in the path that hid what was ahead. I figured to encounter trouble somewhere shortly after turning the corner. I wasn't sure whether to put Dina in front or behind. I ended up going first, and then Dina, and then Frankie. Backwards, I know, but my plan was that if things got hairy, I didn't want the dog blocking our way to the car. He was on his own since he didn't seem to want to protect us. Again, I know I couldn't be sure one way or the other, but I had to plan accordingly. The sun was starting to make its way into the final chapter of the day's novel. It hovered on the western horizon as shadows began to change from short statements to long descriptive paragraphs, promising a scary night if you were to choose to stay among them until they bled into one darkness. And up ahead probably awaited my biggest obstacle. I slowed my pace as we came closer to the bend in the trail. There was no insect sounds, no small animals scurrying this way and that. The slight breeze cutting through the trees held the warmth of the day in its grasp, but you could feel a coldness pushing its way into existence. I turned the corner and there was nothing. Ahead the trail snaked in and out, but basically kept a beeline to the parking lot where our car awaited. It was still a long way, but we would arrive within an hour, or with an hour of sunlight left. And then I heard the rustling of something moving parallel to us about maybe 10 or 15 yards off. It was far too close to be comfortable, and I lagged back and let the dog take the point, and I fell in behind Dina. I wanted to be able to keep eyes on her at all times. Plus, I could encourage from behind, where if I did so from in front, there was too much of a chance of my getting too far ahead. We made our way through the rest of the trail and came out not far from the parking lot, only to be joined by the hairy man. There was nobody else in the parking lot, and he chaperoned us all the way to the car. Nothing came of it, and he watched us as we unlocked the car and got inside. We drove off with him still watching, sitting in that squatted position in which we first found him. I still wonder if it could have been a Bigfoot human half-breed. I would be surprised to find out that the thing was either human or Bigfoot. It looked too much like a human, even though it was extremely hairy. Maybe it was a Bigfoot, but there was no terrible odor, and the hair on it or fur on it really did seem to have been groomed or in some fashion. There are some pretty extreme human beings in this world, but I've never seen any that had so much hair as to appear to be fur. And I don't think I have ever seen any man with shoulders quite as wide, and the arms on that thing were overly long, and the muscles seemed not only too big, but there also seemed to be some extra muscle on them, perhaps some that would be considered missing on a human's arm. I also wonder about the conversation I heard going on at one point. Was there another one in the vicinity? It stood to reason, since very few primates are known to be loners. It is a frightening thought that there might have been more than one of them. I don't think I could protect Dina from the one. I know I could not have protected her from the two. One last thought. Being male myself, I cannot find fault in the creature man's interest in a female. If you consider that he was the result of a human woman and a Bigfoot male, then he was raised or taught that a mate was chosen the same way he had seen done by his father and mother. When you consider that, it is even more chilling to consider what could have happened that day. Thanks for listening.